Good morning, everybody. We're all very familiar with these logistics at this point, but just as a reminder, if everybody could please stay muted, that greatly reduces any feedback. Additionally, this meeting is being recorded, and the recording, as well as the slide deck that you'll be viewing today, is posted to our council website within 24 to 48 hours, so either tomorrow or Monday. If you do have a comment you would like to make or to participate in the discussion, if you could please put your name in the chat box. I will then call on folks in the order that they appear, or you are also welcome to put your full comment in the chat box, and either myself or Wade can read those out. And if you have any technical difficulties today, the contact information for our IT department at the department is at the bottom of this slide. So you can email tickets at azwater.gov, and they should be able to help you out. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Jenna. Can we back up one slide now? Okay, we welcome you to this meeting of the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee of the Governor's Water Council. We appreciate you taking time out, and by those who are on, and the number of those who are on this meeting, we understand the significance of what we're going to try and do. I'm sure everyone who is interested in water welcomed the commitment of our governor with regards to water in his State of the State message on Monday. We might remember that we previously had allocated $200 million for water development, and I suspect that even with the $1 billion the governor put into play, we're going to be looking for more. And those of us who have been involved in this augmentation process understand that it's going to take money, and people are going to have to pay more, and we need to get that message out. But if we do that, the quality of life that we enjoy will continue. I believe that we can find the water to do those things that are important for our state. So today we have a pretty ambitious agenda with only 2 items. And it's not a complex agenda, but we're going to take a look at weather modification and cloud control. We're going to review the statutes of the various states that have this type of program available and have done some work on it. And then we're going to look at the research that has been active in the area. We used to say, okay, you know, we might augment it 10, 15%. Perhaps now the possibilities are a little bit lower than that, but this is not an area where nothing has been done. There has been extensive work, ongoing work, and we hope to be able to use this as one of the many tools. Item number 3 on the agenda, for which we've allocated maybe 30, 45 minutes, is to actually begin the development of a long-term water augmentation plan for the state of Arizona. And our hats off and kudos to Jeff Gibbs for making sure that this is something that got done or is getting done. Many others have recognized the need for such a plan. It's time that we actually do the work, which I don't expect is going to be easy, but we do the work to get a plan in place for the state of Arizona for that which we are committed to do, to make sure that water for the future is there. And regardless of the segment or category of our population or the geographical area, we want to look at the ability to augment the supplies that are available now, because we recognize that something's going to have to be done if we're going to meet our needs. And we're committed to this. When we first thought about it, we thought, wow, that's a great idea. Let's go out and do it. after we thought about it much longer, we thought, oh, wow, this is a daunting task. So let's begin with our weather modification and cloud controls part of the agenda. And we're going to turn it over to ADWR for a review of the state statutes. And I think it's Jennifer Heim. At least that's what the slide says.
Thanks, Wade. This is actually John Riggins. And good morning, the statewide planning manager here at ADWR. I'm just going to provide a little bit of background and context before Jennifer takes the presentation. So as to why we're even talking about weather control and cloud modification here at this meeting. So probably not those of you on this call or on this meeting, but some may be surprised to know that the state of Arizona actually does have weather modification statutes outlined in Title 45 of the Arizona Revised Statutes. These statutes predate ADWR. They're actually originally enacted in the 1950s, and they've largely remained unchanged since then. These are the statutes that actually provide guidance to ADWR to determine the criteria for approving a license from the state to conduct weather control and cloud modification in Arizona. So recently, probably starting about late last spring, early summer, our team in statewide planning began to review these statutes and also research what other states had in rule and law as far as weather control licenses, permits, and their operations. Our meetings and our efforts included meeting with SRP to discuss their own research and experience in weather control and weather modification. And they've been very helpful, and they're going to be presenting actually after our presentation here today. So based on our team's research, there were some concerns about the current guidance outlined in Title 45 in statute. And we felt that this discussion might be one that the committee would like to take on and continue. So with that, I will turn the presentation over to Jennifer Heim. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My portion of the presentation is pretty brief, and it's really to provide just sort of a basic description of what currently exists in Arizona statute related to weather modification and cloud control permitting. And then I'm going to turn it over to Catherine, who will talk about some of the work that she's done in looking at other states and how they administer their programs. With the idea, the hope being that if folks have an interest in trying to think through potential changes to Arizona's administration of weather modification and cloud control, that might be something that this group takes up. So just to provide an overview of existing statutes, as John mentioned, those were enacted in the 1950s, and they have remained relatively unchanged since that time. They are pretty, I would say, sparse in that they generally, for the most part, provide requirements for an applicant to give certain information to the department, but do not necessarily expressly provide criteria on which the department could or should deny or allow weather modification. So I'll explain as we go. So the statutes do require that a person other than the US or the state apply for and obtain a license from ADWR before conducting any weather control or cloud modification operations or attempting artificially to produce rainfall. Go to the next slide. And so this is a list of the information that the applicant is required to provide to the department when they seek a permit. So they are required to identify operating personnel, including information about individuals that are connected with the operating organization. They are required to provide scientific qualifications of all operating or supervising personnel, though it should be noted that there's no express criteria for what qualifies as sufficient qualifications to conduct weather modification. They are required to provide information about all other completed or existing contracts at the time the application is made. So in other words, what other types or what other projects are you doing in the state at the same time? They're required to provide a description of the methods of operation and a description of the aircraft, ground, and meteorological services to be used. And then they're required to provide the names of the contracting parties. So any individuals within the state that they are contracting with to perform the services, including the area to be served, the months of operation, and the dates when evaluations will be submitted. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So as the last slide suggested in the last bullet point, licensees are required to file evaluation reports. Those are required every 6 months during the operation of a project, and a final evaluation 90 days after the conclusion of the project. There are no criteria in statute to guide a licensee, though, however, on sort of what to evaluate their project against. There's not really sort of clear objectives or goals for weather modification that are set forth in the statute. And then the remaining provisions, there's a provision that provides that conducting unlicensed weather modifications operations is considered a Class 3 misdemeanor. And then there's an exception from the licensing requirement for the use and operation of, and I apologize, this is actually the language from the statute, and I'm going to read it because it could be subject to some interpretation, and so I don't want to put a gloss on it. But it's an exception for the use and operation of equipment and supplies designed for weather modification by an owner, lessee, or licensee of real property used for agricultural purposes on the property for his exclusive benefit. So it seems to contemplate that someone could do this sort of for their own, on their own land for their own benefit for agricultural purposes. Obviously, you know, you might query as to whether or not weather modification could be confined to a single property in that way, but that is in the statute. All right, we can go to the next one. So, you know, as we have been looking at these statutes, we did see that there are potentially some gaps that kind of gave rise to some questions. Are there, or should the department be considering whether there are acceptable or unacceptable objectives related to weather modification? Is there a specific technical feasibility or efficacy requirements that the department should be considering? And something that many states who where weather modification projects are occurring address issues related to liability. Many states contain immunity provisions for the state. I'm presumably in order to encourage the issuance of permits for weather modification, and due, I think, to some uncertainty related to issues around liability if something, for instance, were to go wrong. All right, and I think we can go to the next one. So, and Catherine in her presentation will talk about some give an overview of how some other states address some of these questions. In talking through this and thinking through this, I think we at the department thought that both the regulated community and the state might benefit from having some greater certainty with respect to some of these issues. And that might hopefully encourage beneficial projects to go forward that might not otherwise occur while still providing important protections to the public. And that may be my last slide. Let's skip to the next. Okay, yes. So I can pause for questions before I pass the baton, or well, I'll ask maybe Jenna, or I'm sorry, maybe I should ask Wade how you'd like me to proceed.
Well, let's see if there are any questions right now.
Great.
We hope that there's some idea of a regulatory scheme that would be better perhaps than what we have now, since we could call a little bit lacking in our regulatory scheme. And it's something that those states that have adopted perhaps more extensive schemes have done so in response to recognizing the need, as well as understanding that this is not something you can do completely unregulated. Having done the verbal pause, Chris Udall has a question. Go ahead, Chris.
Good morning. I was curious to know, I guess since the 50s, or is there any data of who's applied thus far in Arizona for who's actually, used this statute?
Hey, Chris, this is John Riggins. To my knowledge and others, I don't believe anyone has applied for this app, or we have not received an application at ADWR for this license.
Well, might we go a bit further, John? Do we actually have an application form for this license?
No, we do not.
Thank you.
It's not to my knowledge.
Any other comments or questions?
Nothing in the chat right now, Wade. I will keep monitoring.
Okay. Then Jennifer, move on.
Okay, I will pass the baton to Catherine.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good morning, everyone. As previously mentioned, my name is Catherine, and I coordinate the Community Water Systems Program at the department. Today, I'll be providing a brief overview of state laws and regulations regarding weather modification. Before I do that, however, I would like to note that federally, there is some regulation of weather modification, and this stems from the 1972 Weather Modification Reporting Act. And as the name might suggest, this act has required that all non-federal weather modification activities are reported to the federal government via the Secretary of Commerce, and more specifically via the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So any subsequent mentions of reporting requirements are going to be specific to the states. The table on the screen was taken from a law review that was published last year, and all the states that are listed have some sort of mention of weather modification, from just a brief passing mention to more extensive statutes dedicated to weather modification only. And then to differentiate how comprehensive each state's laws are, the table compares the presence of the four most common aspects of weather modification regulations, including reporting, licensing and permitting, public participation, and liability concerns. And right off the bat, you can probably tell that the states do differ quite a bit. Some states like Alaska or Arkansas only mention weather modification in passing. And generally, when a state only mentions it in passing, it is referring to allowing the state to use weather modification in times of emergency, or permitting the state to use weather modification in continuing research. Most of the states, however, go beyond a brief mention and go on to develop reporting requirements. These requirements stipulate to whom the reports must be sent, the frequency in which they need to be submitted, and occasionally what has to be contained within the reports. I will say a notable exception to that rule is Illinois. Illinois does have other aspects of weather modification that they go on to define further, but they do not include reporting. Similar to reporting, many states go on to have licensing and permitting requirements. These requirements all require the potential licensee to be deemed competent in some way. Although the approach is different between states, some states like Arizona and Texas do leave that decision up to the discrepancy of the director of whatever weather modification program they are running. And then there are other states such as Colorado who have a very extensive list of what exact education, degrees, publications, experience, and certifications a potential operator must have. Another aspect is public participation. Many states do choose to include this, and this can range anywhere from simply notifying the public to having more extensive public hearings within the projected area of impact. Finally, several states also choose to address liability concerns in the regulations. Colorado, which has a more robust weather modification statute, defines liability for both the state and the operator. This includes a general governmental immunity clause, as well as limitations on what types of liability pertain to weather modification activities, and the types of legal recourse that may apply for those who fail to meet the regulations. Many states, however, only address governmental immunity in terms of liability. From the listed 29 states and the capital, Washington, D.C., the department selected 6 of them to review in further detail. In interest of time, I'm not going to be going over them, but they will be included in the slides, and if you are interested in reviewing them yourself, you can access them on the slide deck after this meeting. And with that, thank you, and I will be passing on to James Walter with SRP.
Thank you very much. Jim?
Good morning, James Walter. I am a meteorologist at SRP. I've been a meteorologist there for almost 20 years and am also the lead of the water measurement group. Can you go to the next slide? Today, I'll be talking about some of the advancements in the science of cloud seeding, along with the activities that are going on in the Western U.S., as well as talking a little about current research activities that are occurring for Arizona right now. Next. All right, so to start off, just to give a brief explanation about winter orographic cloud seeding. This is the type of cloud seeding that occurs over the Western U.S. And in its title, winter, it's used to enhance snowfall and snowpack, which then increases surface water supplies across the West U.S. And how it works is, as storms enter the West, the mountainous regions of the West, the air is forced to rise up and over the mountains. As air rises, it cools, and then the moisture in that air condenses and forms clouds. Those clouds are made up of small droplets of water. And in fact, in these sub-freezing environments, that some of this water remains in a liquid state. It is known as supercooled liquid water. And for this water, the supercooled liquid water, to fall out as snow, we need to have an ice nuclei for it to join with to cause the supercooled liquid water to freeze. And then as that occurs, these ice particles then join to form a snowflake and fall. This process is very inefficient, with about 10% of the water that is in a cloud falling as precipitation. And sometimes the clouds contain a lot of this supercooled liquid water that can be acted upon by an ice nuclei, and sometimes it contains frozen water that is already in ice form and then goes through the process without the ice nuclei. So for cloud seeding, how it works is to insert an ice nuclei into the cloud to promote the supercooled liquid water to more efficiently freeze, form into a snowflake, and fall to the ground. How this ice nuclei is inserted into the cloud is from an aircraft flying through the cloud or from a ground-based generator. And typically, the ice nuclei that's inserted is called silver iodide. If we go to the next slide. So cloud seeding has been practiced for centuries. Ever since people have been dependent on rainfall for drinking water, for agricultural uses, there's probably been some sort of methodology to enhance precipitation. A lot of this is probably pseudoscience, as as the story of Charles Hatfield goes. I don't know if you're all familiar with that story. If not, I would recommend if you want a good read and a history lesson to look at Charles Hatfield, who in Southern California tried to end the drought by through his method of cloud seeding back in 1916. And in fact, Southern California in January of 1916 received 30 inches of rain, with flooding all over the region. However, it was most likely not due to the efforts of Charles Hatfield, and it wasn't until 1946 where GE scientists accidentally discovered cloud seeding and the potential to augment precipitation or increase precipitation through cloud seeding by inserting an ice nuclei. They did this by working on a project trying to reduce icing on aircrafts, and they inserted cloud seeding nuclei into a cloud chamber, and lo and behold, the supercooled liquid water droplets in that cloud chamber were frozen and fell to the bottom of the cloud chamber as ice particles or snowflakes. They took what they learned in the lab and applied it in the environment with success. And shortly thereafter, word got out. And it was as early as 1947 where Phoenix College, some professors at Phoenix College in Arizona Republic, rented an aircraft and started seeding clouds outside of the Valley of Arizona. This further escalated to both research and operational projects across the state of Arizona in the 50s and 60s. Some of those participating would be the Salt River Project, cloud seeding the Salton Verde watersheds. The U of A was doing cloud seeding research over the Catalinas, and the military was doing research over the Flagstaff area for cloud seeding. Now, a lot of this didn't result in any long-term activities, as the results from the experiments and the operations were inconclusive. And I'd like to say that a lot of it had to do with the infancy of the science and the methods involved. As I mentioned before, the type of seeding that happens in the West is the orographic wintertime cloud seeding. Well, in the 50s and 60s, they were treating all clouds the same. They were treating warm season clouds the same as they are treating winter clouds. And the process of rain and snow is not the same in both of those cloud types. So that really led to mixed results. However, the interest didn't stop. And in the 70s and 80s, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation continued, along with local partners, to perform research across the West U.S. This included Arizona, with most of the studies, they're known as the Mogollon Rim studies, occurring over the Verde watershed, over the Mogollon Rim, south of Flagstaff, mostly focusing on the Happy Jack area. One thing that they found were that those storms were loaded with supercooled liquid water. However, they struggled in getting a seeding agent into the clouds to produce or enhance the precipitation process. If you go to the next slide. The last field research project in Arizona occurred in 1995, and this was known as the Arizona Project. This project was funded by the National Weather Service and incorporated numerous universities throughout the West US. They had tons of instrumentation out, and it incorporated the use of high-resolution weather models. This is kind of key. And the weather model that they were using at that time was known as the MM5. And a high-resolution weather model at that time was a weather model, a computer weather model that had a resolution of about 10 kilometers. And at that time, that was very, very high. And they saw encouraging results, much like the Mogollon Rim study, where there was lots of supercooled liquid water. In fact, they identified some other weather features that would enhance or benefit from cloud seeding over the Mogollon Rim, as they identified with that weather model atmospheric phenomenon known as a wave cloud that also develops to add uplift in the atmosphere in addition to the mountainous terrain. However, they came across the same challenges that was discovered in the 80s, and that was getting the seeding agent into the cloud. That's where it stops with Arizona as far as research. However, some really groundbreaking research has occurred in the 21st century. First, with the Wyoming Weather Modification Pilot Project. This was a project that cost in excess of $10 million, occurred for a pretty long period of time from 2008 to 2013 in Wyoming, and it was a rigorous randomized target control study. However, they struggled with results. Their analysis suggests a 5 to 15% increase or benefit in precipitation from the cloud seeding. However, these results were statistically insignificant. But I think the big take home from this study is the development and use of high resolution weather models in the study. In this more modern era in the 21st century, these high resolution weather models now are at a resolution of 1 kilometer. So 10 times finer the spatial resolution as what was occurred in the Arizona project. And what they found was that the extra area effects of cloud seeding, or those the benefit of cloud seeding, extended well beyond what they thought it was extending. So sometimes the control site, when it was downwind of the target site, was actually receiving benefit from the seeding agent. And so that kind of messed up the statistical results. In addition, when they were looking at plume dispersions from the model, they were noticing that when they were cloud seeding the target area, because of complex terrain, the precipitation gauge that was used for the analysis that represented, tens of thousands of acres of targeted land, this 12-inch gauge, a lot of times that gauge was not being directly impacted by the seeding agent because of the complex terrain and the wind that was moving around that. And that was identified by these high resolution models. But that didn't mean that the target area wasn't being impacted. In fact, it was. And so by use of the high resolution model, they were able to hone in on about a 10% increase and gain confidence, even though it wasn't statistically significant. Now, this lends us to the last cloud seeding project that has occurred over the West, and that's in Idaho. And it was driven by Idaho Power Corporation. They participate in a lot of cloud seeding activities, but they wanted to document the life cycle from releasing the seeding agent to the snowflake hitting the ground. And so they got funding from the National Science Foundation and brought in the National Center for Atmospheric Research, the University of Wyoming, and several other research entities. And that was the goal. The aim was to document cloud seeding from the insertion of the seeding agent into a cloud to the snowflake hitting the ground. And they had success. They documented this occurring several times. And in fact, it's the first research project to document this. And there's numerous research articles that have come out recording these, the life cycle and the enhancement of precipitation. So this was a huge win for the science of cloud seeding, showing the actual cloud seeding process occurring and documenting it. I have links to a lot of research papers related to these projects. They are attached to this presentation. So when this presentation is made available, you can go in and dive into the research articles and look at the groundbreaking science that has occurred in the 21st century. Next slide. Now I'd like to move into the activities that are currently occurring across the West. I would like to cite some great organizations, the North American Weather Modification Council and the Weather Modification Association, as a lot of this information has come through members of these organizations. These organizations are, really good at promoting and informing and educating people about the science of cloud seeding. If you're interested in learning more about cloud seeding, I'd recommend going to their websites, as they have lots of information on the current state of cloud seeding in the US and around the globe and the science. If you go to the next slide. This graphic is produced by the North American Weather Modification Council, and it shows all of the cloud seeding activities that are occurring in the West. And as I started the presentation introducing the wintertime orographic cloud seeding, you can see here that there's other activities occurring outside of that. Those are the green areas on the map. Those are cloud seeding activities or operational projects going on warm season clouds. And those in Texas are for precipitation enhancement. Those in Alberta and North Dakota are for minimizing hail damage by reducing hail in the clouds. But if you look at all the blue projects across the West, those are the ones that are occurring to enhance precipitation and water supply. However, there's one in Oregon that isn't quite for that. It's actually at the Medford Airport, and it's there to reduce fog so they can have more takeoffs and landings. You can see on this chart that there's a couple states that aren't participating in any operational activities. Washington's one, and that's likely because they get plenty of precipitation. Another is Montana, and Montana's interesting because they're very interested in cloud seeding, probably much like Arizona. And in fact, I participated in a workshop in Bozeman, Montana in 2019, where the North American Weather Modification Council came out and answered a lot of questions to local governments and state governments, as well as water districts, about some of their questions and concerns with cloud seeding. And that is something that I'm sure the North American Weather Modification Council would be more than happy to do for Arizona if Arizona was interested in such a workshop. And then you can see Arizona and New Mexico. And we'll talk about Arizona in a few minutes. But if we go to the next slide, here we can see more detailed the activities that are occurring in the states. And you can see that California has by far the most projects, 16 total across the state. But you can see a lot of other Western states are fairly active. Colorado and Utah have quite a few projects. I've mentioned Idaho before. They probably spend the most money, have the most money budgeted for cloud seeding activities. All of these states utilize local and private funding. Local funding would be from water and irrigation districts. Private money typically comes from recreational businesses, specifically those that are related to snow activities. But then again, a lot of them utilize state funding too. I have a question mark next to California because there's some questions. I wasn't able to gather enough information to be confident in saying whether the state of California is funding or not funding cloud seeding activities. And then you can see some states receive funding from external states, and that would be Colorado and Wyoming, and that would be lower basin states providing funding for the operations to support enhancements on the upper Colorado basin. And a lot of these activities have been occurring since the 50s, but you can see that Idaho and Wyoming are the newest to the game with their activities starting in the 21st century. We go to the next slide. So where does Arizona stand as far as cloud seeding? You know, we participated in a lot of research activities and even some operational programs in the 50s and 60s. research in the 70s and 80s, but not a lot has been going on. However, looking at the state, there's a few things that you need for winter orographic cloud seeding. You need mountains. You need a high elevation area so that you can get those clouds in a sub-freezing environment where the supercooled liquid water would exist. And likely you would want an area that had a consistent, reliable snowpack. So as you enhanced it, the runoff would come with spring snowmelt. And all of Arizona, you know, the White Mountains stands out as the prime candidate. Here you can see that they have almost 500,000 acres above 7,500 feet in elevation. Even above 8,500 feet, there's over 250,000 acres. When you compare that to the Salton Verde watershed, it's, you know, the White Mountains greatly outweigh those other regions as far as areas of high elevation. And that's the same for all of Arizona. So it begs the question, why hasn't anything really been done over the White Mountains? So the next slide. And to further this question, if we look at the salt watershed, here's a map of the salt watershed and the subbasins within the salt watershed, we can see that 56% of the stream flow on the salt watershed comes from the White and Black rivers. And that are the rivers that occur over the White Mountains or the upper salt. If we go to the next slide. Well, Salt River Project has been wondering, you know, why there hasn't been a lot of research over the White Mountains, as well as the White Mountain Apache tribe. And about 8 years ago, the Salt River Project started talking to the White Mountain Apache tribe about some of these questions, and both expressing desires to look into the feasibility of cloud seeding. And a formal research partnership regarding cloud seeding occurred because of those discussions. And since then, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, the City of Phoenix, and Tempe have actually become financial contributors into a research project that has now started. This research project is looking at the feasibility or the climatology of winter storms that could be cloud seeded by looking at past events. Now, this research was awarded to a research institute known as the Desert Research Institute. They were chosen because of their vast experience in doing academic research in cloud seeding, as well as doing operational projects, lending to a great deal of applied knowledge in the science of cloud seeding. If we go to the next slide. And here we can see the tasks that we are trying to learn, the tasks that will be completed in the project related to this research. And the first task is to use existing long-term precipitation data and ice algorithms to do simple statistical analysis of the potential for cloud seeding based off of past events. The second task is to start utilizing these high-resolution weather models and to develop a high-resolution model over the White Mountains and to look at the atmospheric conditions to see if they are ripe for cloud seeding, with climatology developed, looking at how often, using past events, could seeding have occurred during the winter and what the benefit would have been. The third task is to use plume dispersion modeling with that high resolution weather model to look at the target area that could be seeded, as well as the methodologies of seeding. Would it be ground-based seeding, or would it need to be aircraft-based seeding? And then the fourth task of the research project is to combine all of what is learned in tasks 1 and 3 and do a cost-benefit analysis by looking at what the benefits could be regarding the cost to produce the precipitation and the amount of runoff that would result from it. That's currently, the project that's underway, it's about halfway done. The hard parts have been done as far as developing the high resolution weather models. Now the work that needs to be done is digging through all of the data. We will be having some upcoming meetings with our funding partners to look at some of the initial results and to kind of drive the project in a direction that would benefit the state of Arizona. Next slide. And so with that, that concludes my presentation, and I would welcome any questions.
Don, you have a question? Go ahead and come on.
So it looks like Don's question is, where in the mountains will this be done? Mount Baldy. Mount Baldy is in the White Mountains, and in fact, currently it is just strictly a statistical and a modeling research project that we're doing. So we haven't done any physical cloud seeding. At this time, we have no plans to do any cloud seeding. It's just to use modeling and statistics to look into the feasibility based off of the atmospheric conditions of the past decade or so. So nothing has occurred. We're just looking at, is it even feasible over the White Mountains? And if it is, what would the potential benefit be? All right, and it looks like another question.
Yes, Chris Udall.
Yeah, me again. Thank you. Just a quick question. Is the research looking at strictly the Salt River watershed, or is it looking at headwaters of the Little Colorado, the Upper Gila? Are those parts of, or are those going to be looked at?
So, coming from a Salt River Project perspective, Salt River Project is obviously interested in the precipitation and surface water benefits for the Upper Salt River. However, the results from this study would extend beyond the Salt River watershed and could be transferred to the Little Colorado, the upper portions of the Little Colorado Basin and the Gila River watershed, because they're so close in proximity.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Otondo.
Thank you, Wade. I just wanted to know about funding the research, of course, SRP, and I think you said the White Apache. Is there enough funding for this research? And can you just tell us a little bit more about funding for this research? And is there enough money to do this?
Yes. Again, the research is strictly a modeling and statistical activity. And so the funding isn't that considerable when it comes to like an actual operational project. And yes, we have all the funding at the moment needed. It is a collaboration between the Salt River Project, Arizona Department of Water Resources, City of Phoenix, and Tempe, and the White Mountain Apache Tribe are on as advisory support and a partner with Salt River Project.
James, are you aware of any upper basin Colorado River efforts other than the one that's reported on the far north? Is anything being done in Colorado?
You know, on that one slide that I had, I believe there's 7 projects going on in the state of Colorado itself. And then Wyoming has 3 projects going on, and those are all upper basin projects that are resulting in enhanced stream flow and water supply into the upper basin. In addition, let's see, I guess in Utah, there's several projects there. A lot of them are in the Great Basin and don't impact the upper Colorado Basin. However, a few of them do, and that would be, I think, the Uintas would enhance surface water supplies on the Green River. So that's kind of the activities that are currently going on the upper Colorado Basin at this time.
I'm going to name some names here just real quick, like Sandy, you stand by, but Jeff, are you aware of anything, anybody else from CAP on this meeting that could tell us what they might be aware of as far as upper basin development of projects other than what James has just listed for us?
I'd have to get back to you, Wade. I know we've had some projects in the past. Can't speak right now off the top of my head. I'm touch base with our Colorado staff. But we can definitely get you some information on the projects that we've worked with in the past.
Okay, and is there anyone else that you can see from CAP that might know that's on?
Orestes or Deanna are not on. Check.
Sandy, what are you aware of on the upper basin, if anything?
You know, the only things that I remember or recall really, I thought Wyoming was doing some stuff, and I think you've reflected that on in your presentation. That's the main one that I can recall. I haven't heard much in Colorado, so I can't shed any more light on that.
Let's speak in general terms, other than what SRP is doing now. Does the committee have thoughts on more that might be done as far as development or augmentation of supply through this? And just give us some comments on weather modification, cloud seeding, what you think it holds as a future for Arizona. Sandy? Is that a yes vote?
Yeah, so it's actually both, yeah. And I think particularly expanding and really promoting and supporting the project with the White Mountain Apache Tribe and Salt River Project is something that we're very interested in. And I know we were trying to also get some funding in there. I need to follow up with our funding group to see where they're at on that. But that to me is something that is very viable and worth putting some money into. It's still so the results and the outcome of it are obviously difficult to speculate on with any absolute certainty, but I would not want to miss the opportunity to explore it further and see if it's really a viable, or if its long-term viability is something that can be turned into additional projects.
Thank you. James, was the White Mountain area chosen in part because it's SRP's watershed, or in part because it was really a good opportunity and as demonstrated by past experience and weather patterns? What I'm leading up to is, why not the Flagstaff area, which has a reputation for having some of the heaviest snows in the United States?
Well, this research project was kind of spearheaded by the Salt River Project and the White Mountain Apache Tribe. And so that lends itself to doing the research over the White Mountains or the Upper Salt. In addition, as I went through kind of the past research that's done over Arizona, the White Mountains is kind of an area that hasn't seen any past research. So we have some information to go on for the Flagstaff area. We have 3-4 projects that clearly document that the storms have the right conditions. It's just getting the seeding agent into the cloud. And at the time, ground-based generators were the lowest cost method. And that wasn't going to happen for the Flagstaff area as far as being effective at cloud seeding. You would need aircraft, which was very expensive then. But however, the costs have kind of come in line almost with each other. And aircraft seeding isn't as expensive as it used to be. And so with the current research that exists, it wouldn't be hard to transfer some of the things learned on the White Mountains to other regions such as Flagstaff when it goes to looking at maybe some of the costs of aircraft seeding over there. So to answer your question, the White Mountains was the focus because that's where research hasn't been done in the past. That's where the opportunities look the greatest. It was a great question from the White Mountain Apache Tribe and the Salt River Project, and that the results from the study probably could be transferred to the other regions where more knowledge is already known.
Thank you. Very good response. Do you see, James, or anyone else in the meeting, do we see the possibility of technology breakthroughs or changes away from cloud seeding or improved cloud seeding? Is there a methodology or a process change that could be further explored that might have better results, or are we pretty much looking at what we've been looking at for 50, 60, 70 years? The best way to do it is find some clouds and make them give up their water?
So I would say that we have found some improvements. However, the basic premise or the science of what is occurring is still the same, and that's converting that supercooled liquid water into ice so that it can drop out of the cloud as a snowflake. So some of the latest research is looking at maybe some other seeding agents or methodologies, such as the use of propane. That they have propane generators, and what that does, when you let compressed air out of a tank, the end of the tank gets super, super cold. So the air released out of these propane generators is at like minus 70 degrees Celsius. And so as that's entered into the atmosphere, it automatically freezes that supercooled liquid water. And then that supercooled liquid water then turns into ice and becomes ice nuclei. So that is a methodology that is being explored. It can be used in conditions where the standard silver iodide can't be used. But probably the biggest groundbreaking improvements that are occurring over the West is, those projects have been in place, a lot of them from the 50s or the 60s. It's using these high resolution weather models to optimize the projects. So Colorado has been doing this, Utah starting to do this. And what they're doing is they're seeing if their cloud seeding generators are optimally located to have the biggest benefit. And they use these high resolution models to test that question. And what they're finding is that they could place these generators in much better areas. And so that is occurring across the West, the optimization of the programs. And that's where the biggest benefit is occurring at this time in the science. So that puts Arizona in a really good situation because we don't have these programs that have been occurring for decades. So if the research comes out really positive, we would be potentially, starting a project that was already optimized.
We like hearing that.
Yeah.
What about backing up a little bit? We're right now, at least the approach seems to be you got to have some clouds and then you can get the water out of the clouds. Any weather pattern modification, cloud generation, any research in those areas that might help us produce the clouds that have the moisture?
To my knowledge, there's no technology that can really change weather patterns such as that. So the problem with cloud seeding is that in drought years, there's no clouds to seed, right? One of the benefits that cloud seeding can offer, though, is in a changing climate, we know that as temperatures warm, the atmosphere will hold more moisture. So there is the idea that as warming occurs and maybe precipitation becomes more variable over Arizona, the clouds may have more supercooled liquid water in them. And so the ability in the future to enhance precipitation may grow due to the warming environment and the ability for that atmosphere to hold more water vapor. But
What
still,
about,
you can't
go ahead.
fix a drought.
Well, you're correct. We're finding that we can augment, but you've got to make it rain, you've got to make it snow, or it's got to rain, it's got to snow in order for you to fix the drought. And at this point, I agree with you. There doesn't seem to be anything we can do to modify the weather to the extent that we can create more precipitation. We can take what nature gives us and get more from it. And along that vein, James, are you seeing any, shall we say, down pattern effects when there are successful augmentation exercises? We have heard from time to time that by taking the precipitation out where you're having the cloud seeding, does it appear to have any negative effect on those who are, shall we say, down pattern, or the direction that the pattern is moving, those that lie in that path, that they are deprived of precipitation because of the cloud seeding?
So you're talking about the robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario of cloud seeding. And in fact, there has been no documentation of negative impacts downstream of a cloud seeding project. In fact, I even mentioned it a little bit about one of the problems with the Wyoming weather modification pilot program. And that was that the seeding benefit was extending much farther than they thought it would. And there's been some research to continue this idea, and that well downstream of a program or even a target area, there appears to be nothing but a positive benefit, albeit a small positive benefit, but there hasn't been any research to say that there's a negative benefit. And one can kind of put this in relationship to what I explained earlier, and that is the precipitation process is very inefficient. About 10% of that water in a cloud comes out as precipitation. If there's a 10% benefit from cloud seeding, that now changes it to a cloud is 11% efficient instead of 10% efficient. So it's just changing it marginally.
How about negative environmental impacts from this type of program? Have we seen any of that? Have there been complaints that perhaps this is not beneficial to the environment itself?
It is a concern, but from the projects that are ongoing and from even the research projects that I spoke about, there's always been an environmental component where they have gone out and checked the background. Well, they've checked before the project the background levels of silver in the water and in the soils and in the environment, and compared it after the operations. And they have found that in all cases that the silver in the environment still remains at background levels and are much lower than what are deemed to be harmful or impactful. They haven't, silver iodide is inert. It doesn't bioaccumulate in aquatic wildlife and so forth. And so there's all kinds of research papers documenting these questions, but it is a question and it is a concern. However, the science all points in a positive direction related to the question, and that's so far there has been no documented cases of negative impacts from cloud seeding.
Mr. Dunham, make your mic hot and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Noble. James, you mentioned earlier in your presentation that there were some warm weather projects happening in Texas and maybe some other places. Could you kind of shed some light on how that might differ from the winter snowpack studies that we're discussing here? And then a follow-up to that would be, would that somehow be applicable to Arizona during a good monsoon season?
That's a great question. And so, yes, the processes are different and it lends to a different methodology. So summer convective thunderstorms, they use the warm precipitation process. It's all liquid water, small droplets, getting caught in updrafts and coalescing one with another. So joining together to form a droplet that cannot be supported by the updraft anymore, and then it falls as rain. And how they enhance this is by adding hydroscopic seeding agent, something that attracts water. And that would be some type of salt typically. And so it kind of aids in the coalescence of the water droplets to form a water droplet large enough to fall. And like I said, Texas is doing that. It is something that could be beneficial to Arizona. It takes aircraft to do it. You have to find the thunderstorm and fly the aircraft into thunderstorms. They're very brave pilots, I would imagine. And there's some promise there. As far as Arizona goes, though, a lot of thunderstorms are really small scale in nature. You know, it might be a matter of 10 kilometers wide, this storm. And so the impact from seeding that storm is very limited, unlike a winter storm where they're large scale events and impact, you know, hundreds of miles of area. However, if you look at southern Arizona receives about 70% of its rainfall during the summer monsoon. So southern Arizona, to me, would be maybe a candidate for summertime cloud seeding through the warm precipitation process, because so much of the rain there does come during the summertime, and the storms are more reliable and cover larger areas.
We would probably want to study a little more carefully.
For sure.
Because unlike the winter storm events, the summer storm events bring damage with them because of the microburst or the flash flooding that occurs from some of these events. We'd have to take a close look at that. That one could produce true flooding, and that's difficult to deal with.
Yes.
Yeah. It's an opportunity. We would have to figure out if we can manage it so that we get a great benefit, but at the same time, we don't cause that type of damage that has got to be avoided.
There's a lot fewer storage opportunities of surface water in southern Arizona too, and that would be something that would have to join a program, I guess, to capitalize on the added surface water that's resulted from the precipitation.
The chair is asking the committee if there is anyone who would be opposed to including weather modification by cloud seeding as a part of the statewide long-term water augmentation plan. Hearing no objection, we will now include that along with various other things that we will determine as part of our plan. So is there any other discussion that we want to include on our review of cloud control and weather modification? If not, let's move to item number 3 on the agenda, development of long-term water augmentation plan. If you're thinking that the chair is about to say, this is what we're going to do, then you're mistaken. The chair is going to ask for ideas and things that the committee feels should be included in a plan for the state of Arizona to augment its water supply. We have already included cloud control and weather modification. So let me explain using that as an example. With cloud control and weather modification, now the committee would study that and look at projects that may be available and develop at least enough of the project so that it could be presented for review to the Water Council, the Governor's Water Council. The Governor's Water Council would then determine whether or not that would be part of the long-term water augmentation plan, send it back to this committee to develop a full project plan that could include everything from where do we go from here, what's going to be needed, if anything, as far as legislation is concerned, what type of expertise is going to be needed, and what type of funding is going to be needed to see this through. Obviously, you don't go making those type of project plans without attempting to quantify, or at least quantifying enough to show the benefits that you're going to get from the effort, including the money. So that's how we'll approach every single idea that comes up in this committee, so that we can get a list of projects with enough information about the proposed project that the council can make a decision and send it back to us on those that are going to be first on the list for development. Any questions about that?
Yes. Wait, this is Lisa.
Aye.
Thank you. This is Senator Otondo. Can in that list we also include supporting the other states that are doing projects that behoove Arizona?
You know, that in itself is probably merits being a separate part of the plan. For instance, I can conceive of very few ideas that could be wholly internal to the state of Arizona and not need any cooperation from the region. Cloud seeding is one that merits cooperation if it's only to share information and data so that people can recognize what we're doing, but also gain from them, as we have through James' excellent presentation, understanding what else we're seeing in our areas. Yes, we've got to have cooperation, and probably are going to need cooperation on some ideas below the border. We recognize that that is the quick access to ocean water that provides the opportunity for development in desalination. But yes, Senator, that's a great suggestion, and I think we have to recognize that as being part of most of the proposals that we'll be taking a look at. Thank you. Other comments? Let's have some ideas.
Mr. Chair, this is Carol Ward. If I may ask a question, I appreciate you laying out how you see the timeline playing. I wanted to check with you. We already know at this point that we have some lack of clarity regarding weather modification, and we could start getting that ball rolling in terms of how to clarify that. Would this committee be interested at this time, or are you foreseeing that we would put this off into the future as we fully flesh out the plan to get some of the members of this committee together, potentially if there's interest, to help build some clarity around the existing statute?
Well, because the chair believes that the likelihood of weather modification being one of those projects that the council says, yeah, get to work on this because it's got to be included in our long-term plan. I think we should begin working on the regulatory schemes, statutes, and other information that we will need when we say to them, to the council, listen, this is what we think we need to have happen. And in this particular scoping of it, we're going to need to make some regulation changes, and these are recommendations that we would look at for that. Probably the regulation changes or whatever we're doing as far as clarifying the statutes, that's going to have to happen regardless of whether or not the council says we're going to put a lot of effort into this, including whatever it takes to develop it and optimize it. So I expect we end up having to work on the statutory scheme or the regulation regardless.
So do you see this as forming a work group in the near term?
Yes, we would like to do that. And I think that we need to form a work group just to look at the current statutes and start contributing to them. Are there any, if you would send me an email, if you'd be interested in serving on it, or if you can get a hold of ADWR and let them know that you're interested in working on this group, let's get this formed up. We'll send out kind of a notice of those who have volunteered. But rather than take that all up right now, we're going to look for help, obviously, from those that have been involved in the augmentation, that is the weather modification, cloud control aspect of augmentation in the past and are doing things, as well as those that have some background with the technology. So yes, let's form up the group. If you want to volunteer online right now, go ahead, put it in the chat. We'll make sure everybody gets considered. When the group gets to 75, we'll probably cut it off and say, okay, the first 5 that volunteered are the ones that get in. But at any rate, we expect to have good, strong response there. Thank you, Chris. Chris is first on the list. Chris Udall.
Wade, this is
There-
Michael Curtis.
Yes, Michael Curtis, go ahead.
Would you extend an invitation to Gail Griffith or Rusty Bowers to maybe have the legislature somewhat informed of the fact you're forming a working group to draft water legislation?
In all respects, and each time, we will be including not only the speaker and the chair, but we'll include the chair. I see Senator Kerr is online today, but she was there earlier. But we make sure that both the House and the Senate are included in the invitation to participate in legislation development, regardless of what aspect of augmentation we're looking at.
And to that point, along with the vice chairs, can you also please invite the Democrat ranking member that are in the committees, just so that we can have both caucuses on board? Thank you.
We recognize that for this type of legislation to go, we need to have everybody on board, and certainly both sides of the aisle. I do expect, however, that under the circumstances, we'll have a lot more cooperation than dissent. This is a situation that has to be addressed for the state. And historically, I think most people understand we come together on this type of an issue. This is not a time that it's not a partisan issue. This is an issue for state. Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chair, this is Carol Ward.
Carol, please.
Thank you. I am really pleased to hear this much interest from everyone in support of this. I am thinking, though, that, you know, we would be bringing, a work group would bring any work product to this committee as a whole to consider, absolutely. I'm also thinking, though, if we try to form a work group that is, you know, inclusive of everyone possible, and including our legislators who are going to be very busy in this session, that may be really difficult. Perhaps we keep this work group to, you know, those technical people who, you know, may have familiarity with weather mod, that sort of thing, and those people who are able to put the time in to do the initial work, just that initial first lift to bring something forward to this committee, maybe that would be more efficient. And you know, keep in mind the very challenging schedules that so many in this group have.
We understand that. I think that we will find that where the interest is, especially if we're going to need to get something in, that we need to involve those who are going to bring it forward very early on and let them make the decision under the circumstances of the current legislative session, whether or not they can participate at any particular level. I know it's hard. We have had several of our legislators on and off today. We appreciate the time that they've given us. And perhaps, Carol, we'll actually get the sifting because they can't be in 2 places at once, and some of them can't be in 4 places at once, and their schedules are just that way. But I think we probably want to get buy-in from them as soon as possible as to what can be done politically. Let's just give them an invitation and see what they say.
I will certainly keep the information open to everybody.
Okay. And again, if we get overwhelmed, then we'll cut it down. But I'm thinking that since so far all we have is Chris, then, you know, this could be a pretty good group.
Well, we appreciate Chris's volunteering.
Chairman, this is Jenna. There is also a comment from Michael Curtis that was, I believe, interested in joining the work group as well. So we've got a strong start with 2.
Or maybe Mike was just volunteering the legislators. I'm not clear on that. Either way.
We'll work with everyone. Some of you may be contacted, even though you're waiting till after this meeting to let us know of your interest. If you wait too long, we'll contact you just to make sure you know that we need you. Okay, let's talk about some other projects because we've got about half an hour left, and I think we need to get some other ideas on the table besides weather modification. Desalination. Obviously, that is a topic, an idea that is very much favored by a large portion of the state. It's an expensive process. And of course, the governor reflected on it in his State of the State message on Monday. Do we want to go forward from this committee to the council with a proposal for desalination that includes what the governor's ideas and ADWR's and other people's ideas are with regards to desalination, and look at any other possible projects as well? We know that there is brackish groundwater in the state of Arizona, and perhaps 2 to as many as 5 locations. Is this something that the committee should develop and work up a project proposal for desalination in more than one location in the state of Arizona? And I see there are a number of comments. Jenna, are you picking up those comments? Can you get them for they're disappearing from my screen a little bit too fast for me?
Yes, I have them. So there is a request to comment, I believe, from Warren Tenney and a comment from Don Abel that says, I think due to the water crisis, every option should be on the table. So Warren, if you'd like to unmute.
Thank you, and thank you, Chairman Wade. Desalination is clearly going to be a big topic since the governor just highlighted it in his State of the State address. And I think it would be very helpful for this committee, as well as eventually for the council, to have an update regarding efforts on the binational study and projects. I know there has been discussions about it previously. I know the CAP board received a presentation regarding it last year. And I think the more we are informed and kept abreast of what's going on with that, it will help us and the council be able to make better comments regarding it. And I think the binational desalination project is one that we would probably want to focus on and make sure that we're understanding all of the implications of what it would mean for us and what the full benefits of it may be. In regards with your comment on brackish water, I do, if I remember correctly, the desalination committee of the Governor's Water Council had a subcommittee that was looking into the brackish water situation. And I think one of the outcomes from that, if I'm recalling correctly, is that the committee decided not to proceed on pursuing that, primarily because ultimately brackish water is groundwater, and there were implications for how that would impact within the Groundwater Management Act. So that might be something that I think we need to make sure we remind ourselves of what discussions had already occurred on that before we start pursuing that again. So those are my comments, and thank you.
Next on comments, and I'll get back to you, Warren, just as soon as I thought there was one other comment that someone was wanting to make, or they made a comment in the chat. That was it?
Yes, there was a comment in the chat from Don Abel, and related to Warren's comment, I believe, Warren, you're recalling the Desalination Legal and Regulatory Subcommittee, and they did produce a report that summarized their findings and their discussion, and so I put a link to that in the chat for anybody who would like to look at it.
Yes, I think we'll go ahead and contact the Desalination Committee and see if they could help us work up a statewide proposal, including both ocean and brackish groundwater desalination, so that we could take a look at it as a committee and determine whether or not we wanted to move all or parts of it forward to the council. Again, in the various committees, including this committee, we have studied aspects of water and water augmentation in the state, and we have reported what we have found. Now we're embarking upon a different destination, and that destination is, what are we going to do as a state? And we're going to commit ourselves, expectedly, to a process in various areas for augmenting supply. And desalination's got to be included in that, I believe, and we've got to commit ourselves to a plan for using desalination, whether it's ocean or brackish groundwater in state, to augmenting our supply over the next 20, 30 years. It's got to be a long-term solution. Agree with that, Warren?
I agree that it's important to look at opportunities and potential projects. I think we may want to, at some point, talk a little bit about what augmentation means. Is it to develop a new water supply? Is it to help backfill or supplement water that's going to be cut because of shortages? Is it a way to enhance current supplies? I think, again, in regards with brackish water, I think it's important that we remind ourselves of that report that Jenna posted and look at that and remember that that was something that was brought before the council. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is I think with a lot of attention on augmentation, it's important that we pursue projects that will actually lead somewhere. And I guess I just don't want us, this committee, to start looking down, pursuing a project that another committee has already thoroughly looked at and considered. I'd rather us be focusing on new other opportunities when it comes to augmentation. So that's my thoughts.
That's why I said, let's contact the desalination committee and have them develop this part of the long-term water augmentation plan for the state by coming up with the plan that we would present to the council and saying, this is what we recommend as the plan for desalination in our state. In other words, instead of listing a series of projects that might be possible, let's talk about the ones that we are recommending that we go forward with, because there are opportunities in the state of Arizona for developing new supply in groundwater desalination that are feasible and do not present the challenges that would be obstacles. So I think if we look at it, we can probably find some as well. And I'm talking in the nature of 50 to 75,000 feet a year sustainable. So well worthwhile. And so the West Siders, no, we're not coming after your brackish groundwater unless you say come and get it. At any rate, any other than desalination, and we'll move forward on that, talking to the desalination committee and see if they can help us with a plan. Any other areas that we ought to be looking at?
This is Jenna at the department. I wanted to go back. There was a comment from Pat Jacobs expressing interest in the work group to look at weather modification and cloud control statutes.
Delighted. What about forest health? Do we have those that are, shall we say, from Salt River Project? Are there forest health initiatives that we could support, implement, develop that would provide augmentation of supply that could that we could quantify or verify? Anyone able to speak to that? And is there anyone who would say that that's probably not a good place to spend our money and time as far as augmenting supply in the state?
Wade, this is Charlie Esther. I'm with the Salt River Project, and you know, that's a really important aspect to consider, is whether or not water supplies can be augmented through forest management. And it's something that we have tried to avoid because the real issue with forest protection, it's the forest, it's protecting the watershed so that it can continue to provide the water supplies that it does. Whether there is a benefit of additional water supplies is really up in the air. There are very well-educated researchers that do say there will be an increase in water yield, and there is another camp of very well-educated researchers that say there is unlikely to be much, if any, increase in runoff whatsoever. Now, where the two do converge is over in the White Mountain area, because that is an area of much higher precipitation, and it's an area that has a positive water balance right now. So if you do decrease the amount of vegetation in the area, that area in particular would increase water yield. But in terms of the rest of the watershed, from like the Sholo area all the way to the Grand Canyon, I really think the issue is protecting the watershed from catastrophic wildfire, to protect the existing flows that there are, and not to actually try to increase water yield. I don't know if that really addresses your question, but that's really the position that SRP takes.
Well, thank you, Charlie, because you give us a great example of getting down into the phreatophytes. And that is, what do we do if a potential augmentation project can't be verified, or is only available in certain localities? And I think that we need to look at that and perhaps use forest health and forest management as a good way of saying, okay, let's study this and determine whether or not we can come up with a project recommendation for the council with regards to forest health. It may be that this is going to be a learning process for our plan that says, we can't find enough to really go forward on and say to the council, let's get some money into this because it will provide in certain areas additional augmentation that, according to those who should know, the experts, it will produce results. Obviously, this committee is unlikely to recommend to the council any project that they can't verify results on. I suspect that spending money and just is going to curtail those type of ideas unless they can say, yep, we can see the benefit in this, but if you can't show them benefit, unlikely to agree to it. I think it's well worthwhile for us to study it from that particular aspect. And Charlie, what would we need to do to look into it further so that we can develop for this committee some sort of idea of what we can do? You just gave us a really brief but very good overview of what's going on. It probably wouldn't take a whole lot more than that to simply flush it out enough for this committee to consider it, and then whether or not we want to recommend it to the council. How could we work together and get that done?
Well, that's a great suggestion that you make, and we would welcome your participation in a number of research efforts that we have underway right now with both NAU and Arizona State University, as well as the University of Arizona in a more peripheral way. But we are looking at a number of efforts among the universities to look at what is the change in water balance with mainly with tree thinning, but also with the addition of prescribed fire. We also, I'm sure you've heard of our photography technology that we have applied across some of the watersheds, particularly in the Verde. where we are trying to get a baseline record of conditions and see if there are, noticeable changes after management. So these are all things that I think it might be good for SRP to come to this committee in the future with a rather extensive presentation on the efforts that we are already embarking on, and then to lend a hand to you to participate with us if you wish. But this is it's a difficult question that SRP has been grasping, and as I said, you can get a very, very legitimate argument on both sides of whether or not there will be additional water, and we're just kind of stuck there with we're raising up our hands saying, well, in that case, let's just do it because it's the right thing to do for the watershed, and we'll protect the existing water supplies that we have from the detrimental effects of the type of fires that we've been seeing over the decades. But I would certainly offer our ability to come into a future meeting and present all of the efforts that are ongoing at this time.
Sounds like a plan.
Wade?
Yes.
Senator Rotondo. How about something along the lines of faulty infrastructure where water is lost, especially after some of these horrific fires and the damage done to the watershed, the water infrastructure and loss of water? Is that something that could be also discussed?
Let's talk about our municipal water systems in that respect. Is there anyone online who could comment on whether or not it would be worthwhile for the committee to look into and recommend, or perhaps not recommend, improvements to infrastructure as augmenting supply by decreasing losses through leakage? Recognizing that the cost of such could be just horrendous. But anybody have some thoughts on that? And Jen, I saw there was a comment. We'll get back to that just right away.
Somewhat related to this topic, there is a comment from Terry Sue Rossi about lining unlined canals.
That would be something to look at. I know that down in our area, we have a series of canals, most of which are lined, some of which are unlined. There is some discussion as to whether an unlined canal in the Yuma area is good or bad. The canals are located so close to the Colorado River that the water that seeps out of an unlined canal returns to the Colorado River, and the state of Arizona is given a credit for that. At the same time, we line lots of canals because the prevailing thoughts are there's less water loss from a lined canal. But we certainly ought to look into that. Carol, did I see you with a comment?
Thank you, Wade. I was just letting everyone in this group know that we did have some presentations from SRP not that long ago to this group regarding watershed management, and we will reshare those presentations when we send out a follow-up email after the meeting.
Simone, did we see Simone with a comment? Did we catch that? I thought I saw a comment from Simone regarding, I think it was on forest health, but it dropped off my screen too fast.
There are two comments in the chat. The first is from Craig Caggiano, I believe is how you would say it, from City of Tempe, asking if the committee will be addressing Warren's question about the definition and purpose of augmentation. And Simone then echoed that same sentiment and said she would also like to hear the committee define whether augmentation is considered a new water supply for new uses, or is augmentation intended to backfill supplies being reduced due to shortage.
We need to look at that again. I think that when we issued our report a few years ago, we did work on the definition of augmentation for the purposes of that report. However, under the current circumstances of drought, I suspect that the definition of augmentation is being expanded so that the need for additional supply, increasing supply one way or the other, such as water reuse, those type of options are going to have to be included in augmentation. Decreasing loss is probably going to be increasing supply in perhaps a non-traditional look at augmentation. But let's go back and take a look at what we defined augmentation as for purposes of the report, which kind of focused the committee at that time, and we'll move from there. And obviously that becomes a subject for a future committee meeting to work through that and get a report back on it. Sandy, why don't you make a comment out loud?
You're so mean. No, I want Jenna to make my comment. No, if we're going to look at lining canals, I like the idea where Terry Sue was going with, lining canals and augmenting. But if we're looking at water supplies, truly augmenting our water supplies, what about lining canals like, canals when I drive to San Diego and I look at IID canals, or I'm up in Colorado and looking at their canals that are unlined. What about lining their canals and having that water credited to Arizona's allocation? I know it's crazy, but we're firing off the top of our heads. So that was my contribution for the morning.
And I agree with you. And that goes back to this regional look at augmenting supply. You can't just say, well, let's augment Arizona's supply. That's not going to work. We don't live in a boundary where, within the boundaries of a state, where you can ignore what's going on around you in a 360-degree arc. We have to look at what's happening elsewhere as well when we talk about supply. Augmentation and canal lining is a good example of what some do and some don't do. But we would take a look at that. We're going to have to wrap this up fairly quickly, but I'm telling you, we're going to need to look at importation projects. We need to start working on that. We have legislation with regards to studying that. We need to make some recommendations on importation from the east, whether it's stormwater or other supplies. I remember when, and I'm just too old to have forgotten, but we used to think of those possibilities as being undoable. But today they're coming closer to being reality.
Come on.
And so we need to look at importation. We need to look at infrastructure, how that can help us. And we are going to end up having to develop some project ideas for infrastructure that will augment supply. Weather modification, perhaps phreatophytes. We did do some study on phreatophytes. I'm not certain whether we end up in the same bucket with forest health when you start studying phreatophytes, as to whether or not we can actually augment supply by working on phreatophytes. But we're going to need to look at that as a possibility, recognizing that it has been studied. Now, are there any other project ideas?
Recognizing what you just mentioned, that we are running out of time, but there are two requests to comment in the chat, so I'll read them in order. Doug Dunham requested to comment, and then Warren Tenney.
Well, at least both of you asked. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe you touched on this briefly, but I was wondering if the committee would have any interest in exploring opportunities to enhance reclaim reuse. I think we do a pretty good job in the main metro areas, but there's probably opportunities for some of the smaller communities out there to upgrade their infrastructure or whatever else is needed to make further better use of their wastewater flows to help augment those local supplies.
Absolutely, Doug. Absolutely. And thank you from EPCOR, to recognize how important that is and on a more statewide basis. We're going to have to develop some project proposals for that for the council to look at, because I think it really will result in water augmentation. Mr. Tenney.
Thank you. I just wanted to make two quick comments. First, I agree with your suggestion that we go back and look at the 2019 report from the committee, because I do remember us trying to grapple with how we were characterizing the different efforts that many times people view as augmentation, but perhaps it may be closer to best practices that actually improve water use efficiency. And so, whatever we can do going into the future to make sure that we're maximizing the use of all the water supplies that we have, existing and any new ones, is important to continue to put out there. The other thing, just along with Doug's comment and with your commenting about reuse, just want to note again that the post-2025 committee had recommended to the Governor's Water Council the importance of ADQ fast tracking its rulemaking regarding the administrative rules that would be involved with reuse. Yes, it's true that any water utility can pursue reuse, but that is going to be very problematic without having an umbrella from the state. And that's why it's really important for the state to develop those rules so that it will help and it will provide guidance to all the communities that may be wanting to pursue DPR moving forward. So I echo the importance of looking at DPR projects as well as making sure we have the rules in place to help fast track or help us to be more efficient and effective at developing those projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Warren. Ms. Craig, would you like to go ahead and present that comment?
Oh, sure. I just wanted to mention that the Kyle Center is very interested in helping and supporting plan development, and just that we are gearing up to do a blog series, a social media campaign similar to the one we did recently on the Colorado River shortage. I really just want to break down the complexities and highlight in some cases the considerations of augmentation projects. Like who pays, where does the water come from, who's going to be in charge of the project, who's making the decisions. So like I said, hopefully it will be helpful to the committee's efforts.
It will. We appreciate the efforts of the Kyle Center. We appreciate a lot of the support that we get also from the other universities within the state and on the things that they do as far as water is concerned. I think that we would put our university system against any university system in this country, including those outside of the country in a place called Israel, as to how they work for assisting our state with supply. They do a good job and we appreciate them. Okay, if you have any other comments, get them into Carol, John, or Jenna. It's easier that way, so they can get them collated and filtered and all that other stuff that needs to be done. What are we looking at on this? Carol, John, Jenna, 60, 90 days before we have another meeting?
That is really up to you. Chairman, but what I can offer is that the council next meets on March 25th. So if you are wanting to report on what the discussion was today, which was robust, then that would be the opportunity, and meeting after then is an option, but it is all up to you. As far as a work group as well, I will get with you about when you would like to get that work group stood up.
Okay, then let's start planning a meeting in the 80 to 100 day window and see what we can look at there. And then on the work group, we'll get together and work that offline and get it ready for a report. We have what looks like an agenda. We'll probably not be able to discuss everything that's happening between now and the next meeting in the next meeting, because I just see those agendas getting pretty full. But if we can't get it in, we will make a plan that shows when we can get these issues discussed, so that we have time to get them all taken care of. And I suspect that we're going to meet at least quarterly, perhaps even more often, although 60 days is not always enough time to get things moved around and get done. Any thoughts or comments from the committee on that? And staff, not staff, ADWR, the agency, the department.
No thoughts here. Sounds like there's a lot to cover, so I will get with you offline, Wade.
Oh, thank you so much. And I guess it'd be appropriate to close after Jenna's comment, as always. We appreciate that you took your time today to participate in this meeting. Many of you commented. Your comments are appreciated. We ask you to comment by email or otherwise to the chair, to the department, but let's get some comments in and generate some activity and discussion so that we can further develop this as we want it to be, because this committee can act. And our action will end up being the creation of a plan with multiple projects for augmentation in the long term, but beginning in the near term. Again, our thanks to the department for all they do to support the work that we do, and have a wonderful weekend wherever you are. We hope it snows. I don't care if you're living in Wilcox. I've seen it snow in Wilcox, but I hope it snows wherever you are. That's it for today. The meeting is adjourned.